lesser, greater, middling, makes no difference. The degree is arbitrary, the definition's blurred. If I'm to choose between one evil and another, I'd rather not choose at all.
The Witcher video game series has offered us many tales that otherwise wouldn't have been a reality if CD Projekt Red didn't embark on the journey of developing these games we've come to love and adore today. There have been many quests and tales that had, and still have us questioning the core purpose of humanity in these games. Stories that seem to leave you conflicted with whichever choices you do end up following. Funnily enough, the majority of these dilemmas pertain to the life a Witcher consciously traverses, a life Witchers in general have been destined to lead. We've all heard about the path of Witchers and what it all entails, the unmitigated psychological and physical brutality that such a lifestyle forces upon Witchers is nearly always fit enough to sap the sanity out of anyone. Months seemingly go by whilst Witchers pry for scraps of food, sometimes enduring the toll of famine for weeks on end, all whilst forcing a smile to happily risk their life for a spoonful of grain. Even then, our Witchers never have a guaranteed source of contracts. The continent is vast and wide, yet some ventures always seem to yield a lowly sum of luck. When famine, ridicule, and poverty all corner you like a rat, one is bound to break mentally, and many of the Witchers on the continent do just that. They either become foreigners to their own code, or wither into crippling obscurity at the hands of a foul beast. Well, today we'll be talking about the perfect example of the path, or rather the perfect victim of the path. Hey there everyone, this is Xith, and today we'll be talking about the Witcher Gaetan from the quest Where the Cat and Wolf Play, and I'll be covering a discussion on if you should or should not kill him as a result of witnessing his deeds in the village of Honorton. Before we move on, I want to quickly offer my gratitude to the people who have subscribed as a result of the video I did on Gaetan a couple of months ago. Due to the rising popularity of the Witcher show on Netflix, people who have otherwise never played the games decided to pick up The Witcher 3 in droves, and it has seen a sharp increase in its player base shortly after the release of the show. This means that many more people have come across the dilemma of Gaetan, and naturally so decided to quench their curiosity on YouTube. This is why my video did so well, and I just want to give my thanks to everyone who decided to watch that video. I'm immensely grateful for the fact that you managed to make that video one of my most viewed video essays on this channel. There are many more topics to cover throughout the game, and I'd be honored to present such dissections of lore and discussions with the freshly updated player base we currently have. Now moving on to the story. If you already know the story leading up to this dilemma, then I'd advise you to skip to the time frame that I've placed above. Moving on to the topic at hand, Gaetan. Gaetan is a fellow Witcher, and he was introduced into the games via a DLC quest called Where the Wolf and Cat Play. This quest can be prompted by another quest, which can be acquired by investigating a notice on the contract board in Honorton. This contract calls for aid from anyone willing enough to slay a beast terrorizing the woods nearby a little village called Honorton. There's a vile and dangerous spook, beast or devil of sorts causing no end of trouble near our village, Honorton. We promise our profoundest gratitude and a sizable reward to any brave lad who can slay it. Geralt can make his way to Honorton in an attempt to pursue this contract, yet what he'll be awaited by is a village drenched in the blood of the peasants that used to call it home. Alguls have already capitalized on the feast of a lifetime, and these pests can be dispatched of in an effort to learn what conspired in this bloody village. Inspecting the bodies fails to give us a conclusion, yet upon inspecting the alderman's house, one can find the head of a leshen and a well-furnished office, indicating that the alderman had some wealth to him, more wealth than the usual village in Velen has. The barn outside is the epicenter of our investigation though, for here we can find two wealthy peasants and a pitchfork. One of these two was probably the alderman, whose luck had obviously run out. The blood loss in the barn indicates a fair amount of damage, and that whoever was on the other end of that pitchfork must have lost a substantial amount of blood. Upon exiting the barn, one can once again reflect on how brutally the entire village was slaughtered, and just when you think you've hit a dead end, a girl can be seen running into the woods at the side of Geralt. Approaching and indulging this little girl with her doll or the Axis sign can provide you with a fresh trail to the person who committed this brutal act of savagery. The person on the other end of the pitchfork was indeed Gaetan, a Witcher of the Cat School. Gaetan can be seen in a mortally wounded state, still recovering from the impact of that pitchfork, and it's made pretty clear that he's the main proprietor of that massacre in Honorton. One can either kill Gaetan on the spot or hear his side of the story. A story that I think all of you need to hear in order to understand the true life of a Witcher, whether or not you think Gaetan is the walking epitome of a murderer. Gaetan claims the alderman decided on paying him a measly sum of 12 crowns, something that infuriated an already torn Gaetan, someone who has been worn down by the path and the people that make it a habit of cheating him. If he hasn't already made it clear enough, 12 crowns don't even cover the basic needs of a Leshen fight, let alone the struggle of keeping one's head afloat financially, especially in the unforgiving place we call Velen. Instead of considering to pay the Witcher for risking gut and limb, facing a Leshen toe-to-toe, the alderman decides to fatally cheat him. And for what? A good day's work? Gaetan obviously threatened them after the 12 crown sum was put forth, but wouldn't you be infuriated if you worked on a piece of art for 30 plus hours and received less than 20% of what your time was actually worth? Now moving on from this, they led Gaetan to the barn with the hope of paying him the initial sum they had agreed on with a hidden stash, or at least that's what the alderman claimed. But little did Gaetan know that he'd await the sharp grasp of a pitchfork attempting to directly pierce into his back. Gaetan claims that the impact wasn't fatal, and this allowed his temper to seize the moment and massacre anyone in his way. As he already mentioned before, his temper is quite overwhelming, and even that is an understatement here. By no means am I justifying the massacre by using his temper as a mind-altering deviation that forbade him from acting out sanely, but what I will say is that from what we can gather throughout this universe, desperate and greedy villagers aren't at all an innocent bunch. There are also many theories that envelop what happened before the barn, or at least what led the alderman to act out such an event. Gaetan probably had a bounty out on his head, as do most of the Cat School Witchers, and this can be seen if Gaetan gives you the key to his hideout. Maybe the villagers caught wind of the bounty on his head and decided to solve two issues in one swing, because I highly doubt that the incident in the barn wasn't orchestrated beforehand. It was most definitely premeditated. Setting aside the bounty though, Gaetan performed a professional service which he was gravely cheated out of, so why would he continue to help and protect the lives of men who'd sooner see him in a grave? Why would the begging hand that was at his mercy betray even that tiniest sliver of humanity that was left in him? This is what Witchers have to swallow, and Geralt is no stranger to this merciless custom.
To shit bounties, to the cheating, to then begging me for help and then spitting as I pass. But murder me? Just to save a few crowns? I'm supposed to protect Horsens like that?
Witchers aren't given a choice. They either survive the mutations and live to fight another day, or become a forgotten statistic, and I'm convinced that the latter is far more suitable in comparison to how burdensome Witchers live. Whilst I don't think it was right to massacre the entire village, my entire thesis is based upon understanding how it came to such a thing, and how easily one can be deceived alongside the other strenuous issues that the path throws at Witchers daily. Now, why should you spare this seemingly quote-unquote immoral murderer? Well, a thing to note is that Geralt, out of all people, has no right to pass such judgment. He himself has been tricked and deceived into acts that deemed him unworthy of the public eye. He experienced apathetic episodes of ridicule and thievery from the people he aided. The incident in White Orchard is a perfect example of this. If one were to apply morality and conventional justice to this dilemma, then we'd be correct to blame and even kill Gaetan, but actively killing a wounded Witcher out of moral righteousness is unlike Geralt, or at least the Geralt that we've adapted as a result of the books and the universe we've been thrown in. Geralt isn't a judge nor jury, he's no executioner, and most definitely not in regards to a situation involving a Witcher with nothing left to lose and much more to give.
Ultimately, it's not my job to judge you.
That's it? Not gonna lecture me? Make me promise to mend my ways?
They call me the Butcher of Blaviken, for good reason. I know how it is. Sometimes,
Sometimes heads just roll.
Killing a witcher willing to rid Velen of its beasts is a loss in and of itself as well. Gaetan also isn't a threat unless directly provoked, which I will admit is something a pitchfork to the back will in fact do. There are a few witchers left on the continent, and contributing to that statistic would only further inhibit the state these guilds are in. Gaetan is no angel, nor did he ever claim to be one through his dialogue with you. He is no Yad Carrot, and he's not someone who always has a sociopathic angle to his stories. What he is, though, is a perfect example of what the path can do to a person. Some witchers have entirely different means of lashing out, which manifests with a wide variety of psychological issues. And Gaetan's issue seems to be his unhinged temper. Yet none of this would have happened in the first place if the villagers hadn't schemed to kill him. The alderman seemed overly wealthy as it is, so we may be seeing a recurring pattern here with how Honorton handled such problems. And it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that Gaetan felt threatened by the other villagers, unarmed or not. He was thrust into a situation where he felt like the world was against him, and seeing as how he's already a witcher, that mentality must have been multiplied in the heat of the moment. Taking all things into consideration, at least he refrained from murdering Millie, the little girl we encounter in the woods, for it reminded him of his sister from a time long forgotten. His frustration is palpable, yet I won't go as far as to say that I completely sympathize with him, but what we can all agree on is that the continent is far from hospitable to witchers like Geralt and Gaetan, and I'm sure we can all agree on how perfectly the morals were balanced for this quest. It's a dilemma that has many people conflicted, and from what I've managed to gather, is that Gaetan's struggle needs to be recognized, even when the massacre in Honorton is fully acknowledged. You might ask why. Well, this is because the world that Gaetan and Geralt inhabit is vastly different from the clearly organized civilization we live in. The same terms of civility do not apply to this world, due to how scattered conventional morality is. Because even simple-minded peasants are capable of greedily scheming one's downfall for a tiny sum of coin. If Geralt was in his shoes, I suppose he wouldn't have massacred the entire village, but this is where I'll gladly apply the argument of how much one individual can take before inevitably bursting. We haven't seen Geralt on the path for a while, but I'm sure he recognizes the mental repercussions of trying to constantly fight famine and death. Now, I'll leave the topic on this note. It all depends on what you perceive as objective in this matter. There are so many compelling reasons as to why you should kill him, but I'm hopeful you'll at least observe how crippling it seems to walk in Gaetan's shoes. I also haven't ruled out the fact that Gaetan could be lying about all of this, but if we were to infinitely speculate about this, we wouldn't really get anywhere in regards to this decision. The reward for sparing him in his obviously fragile state is also fruitful, and you can further inquire about how his fellow witchers tried warning him about the bounty on his head. All in all, this quest was perfectly executed. The writing team over at CD Projekt Red definitely deserves a moment of praise for such exquisite writing, and as an amateur writer myself, I can only appreciate and aspire to make such work in the future. One way or the other, evil always seems to find its way into the hands of innocents. None are pure and none can claim to be so. It's about what we mold ourselves into despite our flaws, what we can admit as faults in the company of dissolution. It's what we make of a situation that is eager to see us fail. All of this makes us human. Because if it didn't, then the well-perpetuated myth about witchers would indeed be true. None of this would have happened if Gaetan wasn't as human as the rest of us. Now that's something to think about.
Reminded me of my sister. How I remember her from just before they took me away to the School of the Cat.
How is she now?
Died about 10 years ago. Of old age.